Hi, this story, which is called Landlocked, was written for a collection called Seen from Here, edited by Tim Etchells and Vlatko Horvat, which is available as a PDF from Unstable Object. All proceeds go to the Trussell Trust food banks. So if you like this, you can get a copy there for as little as £5. All proceeds to a good cause. Landlocked. There's no evil in the story, only loss and confusion. Palinurus the navigator fell off the boat and forgot his signature skill. Panic attacks, anxiety attacks, and depressive episodes followed. You don't ask a builder, he remembered trying to explain to someone, if an arch is the truth about something. That isn't the point. For a moment before sunset, light levels were distributed strangely across the landscape so that the coastal hills seemed closer than the house. You can either build an arch or you can't. After that, he drove from town to town up the coast, deteriorating all the way, and no one heard from him again. Her journey was literally at right angles to his. Though she had never learned to drive, she found that after she had eaten a cab driver, it came easily to her, along with the local language. She left not long after him, heading north, following the steady rise of the land, but while the navigator clung to the coast, always keeping the sea to his left, she headed for the interior, seeking out middle-class landscapes with simple founding assumptions. A glass of wine in the evening, a toddler on the patio in the fading light, people waiting unexpectedly to find themselves in their real lives, or unexpectedly trying to outlive the wrong lives, all of their lives. Often she found them surrounded by a detritus of their own acts of abjection, symbolized in collections of rediscovered personal possessions from which they felt alienated. They often remarked that they wondered why they had these objects. She, meanwhile, kept a geranium in a pot in the back of the car, reached behind her now and then while driving to crush a leaf. Palinurus had two repeating dreams. In the first, as he went overboard, the water had an ugly look, dark and speedy, but also with something to it of stagnant harbours, scenes you might find yourself in when you were already dead, shallow in places, black mud banks in static water with a cream of chemicals all over, overlooked by shipping containers, a vicidness, a meniscus full of petroleum rainbows and bobbing fecal matter, bent cans, plastics large and small, small islands of ruderal scrub, whole dead animals with slick fur and no eyes. Like that 1 minute, anyway, but the next changing direction to accelerate and rush past, and then grey and waveless, bowed tight at the surface, here and there pulsing like the worst currents. The big cold rips and eddies of a body of true coastal water carry you off into the night. That moment, felled by the tiller, woken so abruptly from one nightmare into the next, Palinurus knew he'd had it. Yet he hadn't, and through luck and coincidence made it somehow to the shore. That was the unexpected thing about it, he reported. It wasn't by any means the end. She felt some sort of relief to be out of the salt sea. But a life on land had no credibility as far as she was concerned. It was just something to laugh about. Meanwhile, she could see that he was still not sure he hadn't, in fact, died. Their conversations from then on were frequent, but always brief. She might sit with her feet in a half-filled bucket of water, and her shoulders in the sunlight from the window, asking him about the things she could see. From the outset, he'd left her to her own devices in the evenings, while he went from bar to bar along the seafront telling the story to old friends who didn't believe it. The rooms she stayed in during her drive inland were often full of a strong, old-fashioned scent she associated with the seafront barber shops, although it might equally have been confectionery. It was on the edge between perfume and citrus, and also, since there was no one but her in the room, seemed liminal in its actual nature, that is, both there and not there. A little later it would be gone. She would get up and walk about in a restless way, not exactly sniffing the air, but holding it in her nose, and then breathing out slowly, lifting her head like an animal bringing into play an olfactory organ human beings just don't have. Sometimes she thought she could still smell the scent, but more often she couldn't. Later, she would realize it was herself. Palinurus' second repeating dream was essentially one of movement. It was a relic. It was the bodily memory of another time, other levels of confidence and awareness. But given the slightest encouragement, it would spill out of the night and take him over, as if it had been down there waiting since the accident. Understanding yourself, he thought, is always a meaningless joke. But sometimes you can't help wanting to make personal contact with who you are, or in this case, who you used to be. You get lost a few times. You give up. It's scary at first. That's when you remember that the dream always had a lizard-like, ironic look in its eye. Shortly after falling off the boat, he had begun to feel liberated. I enjoyed it, he insisted, the final time they talked. In return, she asked him how much of that elation, that relief, was a diversion, how much of his embrace of what he now called possibility was a covert replay of the final voyage. He said he didn't want to talk about that. Navigation was a broken process for him. He'd taken it up too early, and now he felt free. In the last room she took, they gave her a fruit that tasted like slightly sweetened rubber, which she ate slowly, keeping away the many small flies with one hand. A girl watched her carefully as she ate, her expressions changing as if she was eating it herself. Yum, said the girl, and we plant them every year so they come up. This seemed too literal to mean anything. Why else would you plant anything if not for it to come up? So instead of trying to answer, she looked out of the window at a man on a little tractor going up and down the short, sloping field below the house. He had a dog that ran about untiringly up and down the shallow furrows, which were dark to begin with but dried out in minutes. It stopped at every corner to stand and stare around as if it had never stood there before. Alone in the room again, she found a glass bowl full of water and sunlight, throwing onto the wall every flickering, shimmering, debatable pattern she knew. Who had pulled who ashore? Given the situation, neither of them would ever be sure. The sea had had an ugly look that night. But there's no evil in the story, only a misunderstood gesture, the saturations of self-deception. He's dead and she's marooned. He never leaves his dream. She won't now ever leave that room. It is a comedy, a brief confusion followed by both persons getting, in some sense, what they want. For instance, he often reassures himself as he travels to the coast. To what degree does navigator only mean someone going somewhere? While she thinks, why do I love the light here so much?